We're going to move on to our next panel, and I appreciate that there were a few different kind of themes that ran through that presentation, and one of the ideas that we've talked a lot about in the context of this conference that I kept thinking about was this notion of how we create value and the role that the arts play in fact, in leading the dialogue. Jorn said artists lead the dialogue. We need to follow our artists. Artists, in fact, create value. And we know that the way we create and design our cities has a profound impact on whether the city will be an attractive place to live and produce art. But there was a lingering idea there right at the end about not trying to quantify art. It's a dangerous thing to do. But I liked the idea that what we see and what artists create is what we will, in fact, be remembered for. There's a very powerful idea there that links into this notion we've been talking about around legacy and how we create something for the future. That leads in beautifully and sets up our next panel very well, because our next panel is going to be talking about the urban future, if you will, in relation to culture, research, and new financial tools or models for building the modern metropolis. And I'm going to introduce our panel and welcome them onto the stage. We're very lucky to have with us today from Manchester, Susan Woodward, who is the director of the SHARP project in Manchester in the UK. Welcome, Susan. We also have from Barrie, Jeff Lehman, who is the mayor of the city of Barrie. Welcome, Jeff. We also have from the land of Google, and if you were listening to CBC today, you might have heard Chris O'Neill on the CBC being interviewed by Matt Galloway. Chris is the managing director of Google Canada. Welcome, Chris. And from the Waterloo region, we have with us Alison Demy, who is a partner at Overlap Associates. And lastly, moderating our panel today is none other than Gail Lord, the co-president of Lord Cultural Resources. Where are you, Gail? The floor is yours.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much. Everybody is to be congratulated. This is the last session before a holiday weekend. We're all worried. Is it 5 hours to get to where I want to go, or 4 hours, or maybe I'll just stay in Toronto? That would be one of the things we're thinking about. And I wanted to just start by reflecting a little bit about all the fantastic things that have happened outside this hall where we spent the last day and a half. And so one of them is, where is the man from Burlington? Are you still here? He spent 2 hours driving here yesterday, and today I checked up and he took the GO train and got here in 40 minutes. So he's part of that group that we heard that wonderful talk about, who have a choice and who made a choice based on self-interest. So I hope that designer is still here and he gets that message. Yesterday was also a day where the majority of Torontonians decided that yes, indeed, they would vote for Rahm Emanuel in our next election, our next civic election. Oh, not everybody will appreciate that joke, but I think having done the cultural plan for Chicago, I can tell you he's a great mayor on his own merits, not just by comparison. And the other thing I would say is I brought a prop to start the session off. It is this coffee cup, because yesterday is such an important day. It was the 50th anniversary of the first day that a recreational cup of coffee was sold on the street in Toronto. It's the 50th anniversary of the coffee mill. And I know most people in this audience are too young to remember, but let me tell you that the only other time people ever drank coffee on the streets in Toronto was during the Great Depression, right? Because their homes were foreclosed, and so, there were all these bread lines and stuff like that. So that was a revolution that I think is really important for us to think about as we think about what our session's supposed to be about, is the human dimension, the cultural dimension, and how that links to finance, to government, and ultimately to city building. So the story of the cup, though, is an interesting one. Like, who in Toronto of those days could even get the idea that a recreational cup of coffee could be consumed on a city street. Like, this is really a hard, and the reason, of course, is something else that everybody's talked about here, which is diversity and immigration. Because, of course, the people who brought that concept here were immigrants from Hungary, which they were very familiar with the concept of coffee houses and drinking coffee and all that kind of thing. And, of course, they saw an opportunity, and they had a great sense of risk-taking. And Torontonians, being the kind of sheep that we were and that we are, and the kind of understated people, we had trust in this strange, exotic idea. And this place, the coffee mill, has actually been operating very successfully for 50 years, and I hope they have 50 years more. So there you are. Now, on a more serious note, we're going to try and be somewhat participatory in this session, and so that means that the tables at a certain magic point, and I'm into memory lane, but if you remember the Groucho Marx show, you remember there was a bird. No, you don't. Okay, the bird that dropped down. And I never understood that because I was too young. But we're going to, at a certain point, turn things in a way over to you. But I'm going to start by asking the incredible, talented people in our group a few questions, and then we'll have some debate and discussion. Then we're going to bring you into it. So the first question I'm going to ask, and I will probably go more or less in the order that people are sitting in, is what a word that's kind of come up a few times is game changing. Each person on this panel is in the middle, at the beginning of a very remarkable career involving building and achieving things. So I'm going to ask each one of them, what was a game-changing moment in your work, in your world? It might be a city, or it may be a corporation. What was a game-changing moment? Like, what was your coffee cup? Like, just in case you don't understand the sophistication of my question.
So Manchester was first founded by the Romans in 79 AD. So we're a very, very old city. And much of what I've heard over a day and a half, I take a very different view, I think, from most of the contributors at this conference. I'll maybe touch on that later on. But there are two significant parts of Manchester's history. In 1900, it was the fifth largest populated city in the world. We were called Cottonopolis because we invented the Industrial Revolution. We then lost the Industrial Revolution War and actually became a very depressed city. And we were struggling quite a lot until 1996. We were victims of the largest mainland bomb in the whole of UK, when then the IRA blew half of the city up. And at that point, the city fathers got together with the private sector and individuals, and we decided to rebuild our city. And that's what we've been embarked on a journey of since. What I'm doing for that city, I started off as a TV producer, so I've become an accidental property developer. And what I've done now, what I appear to be doing, is being gifted derelict old buildings on the outside of the city and turning them into the new homes for what we believe in the city is the next strategic economic sector we need to invest in, and that's digital and creative industries. So I build a thing called the Sharp Project. I've just finished one, which I think was what was the architect's image of it, which actually we've built in real time. And I'm about to embark on Sharp 2 and Sharp 3. So my game changer was born out of adversity and terrible catastrophe in order to change our game. We were forced into change.
Catastrophe was a game changer. Can we roll this? It's only short, 2 minutes. Now, I think it'd be a good time to show it. Thanks.
make tea, not coffee. I can cut it now. You can cut that now.
Well, thank you for picking up on the theme. That was good. Is the building built?
I've just finished it and now I'm embarking on 2 more.
And this was your idea, just to come here for a holiday?
I wanted to come and talk about it because we work quite close with people in Toronto. You yourself work quite a lot in Manchester. And because we are that very old city, we are still always very conscious. We need to look outwards to new cities because we still, even after 79 AD, we still need to learn.
That's fantastic. Jeff, can you tell us about, you're a mayor, so you actually have power, right?
Well, you'd think.
We can invite you to this city, we have a power vacuum. Okay, could you tell us, I'll never work here again, it's okay. It's okay. But we've got to liven up the audience, and I'm sure that the Ford brothers would understand this sense of humor of mine. I don't think that's a problem. Jeff, what was a game changer for you?
Game changer for me. Well, thank you for that. I think, first of all, you often miss game-changing moments when they happen, right? You only realize in retrospect. So I'm going to tell you a 38-second story that illustrates a game-changing moment. It's about a friend of mine named Mark, who's a real guy. He owns a communications consulting firm. There's 5 or 6 people. And by virtue of their business, they're laptop and cell phone people, and their client base is in southern Ontario and New York City. So they really could locate almost anywhere. And he was choosing an office location. And the location he chose, within 2 blocks of his office are 75 bars and restaurants, and over 90% of them are independently owned. And within 2 blocks of where the office location he chose are 7 art galleries, 1 public, 5 private, and then 1 that's a kind of collective. There's a small performing arts center, a black box theater. And there's a variety of other amenities, but all of those things were actually central to his decision. Now, if you think about what I just described, an area I just described, the Kings, right, come to mind. I mean, what is that kind of an area? The area we're in, the entertainment district in Toronto. It's in fact in downtown Barrie, okay? And his choice to move there, I think, was sparked by a game-changing moment about 7 years ago, which was when the city of Barrie set out to write a cultural plan. You write cultural plans, we wrote one, and the fundamental philosophy of that cultural plan was upside down from what most cities our size do. Most cities our size build a large performing arts facility and import big shows so that they can kind of play in the big leagues. We turned that upside down and said, what we really want to do is build our domestic cultural industry, if you will. We called the plan Building Creative Capacity. And I should stress, I had no role in this. I became a champion for it as a politician and mayor later. But I think the moment that was game-changing was that plan was written and it said, what we're going to do is build our cultural industry from the bottom up. We're going to try and focus it in our historic downtown. But what we're going to do is invest in our local groups. Call it the Stratford model if you're looking for an example, where you grow a local festival or theater group or visual art scene, and particularly live music scene, and that's something that goes to the 75 bars and restaurants. And it has fundamentally changed the historic downtown of my city. None of those things that I described, or almost none of those things I described, were there 10 years ago. And it wasn't because we wrote a great plan that they happened, but the city government certainly had a major role, because we made direct investments in the groups, actually through operating grants. But we built that black box theater. We supported a number of the private galleries, and the controversy does continue. Even this week, we're having a very controversial debate about supporting individual artists through grant programs. This is still not decided, nor is it a political slam dunk. But I can tell you that the game-changing moment is that people like Mark started locating where they did, and it started to reshape that urban environment. I think because of what was starting to go on in this medium-sized city's historic downtown.
Fantastic, thanks. That's a great example. Far from the Barrie that I knew, I'll tell you as a youth. That's amazing. And Allison, what's your game changer?
Well, I'm from the Kitchener-Waterloo area, And it's now has
That
a
is Canada's Silicon Valley.
Canada's Silicon
Yeah.
Valley. We don't like to know our kind of our own right. We don't always have to be something
Okay, better
north.
still.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it certainly is known for its technology and innovation companies. Google, of course, is one of them. And the reason why that happened really goes back to the 60s when the University of Waterloo started in Waterloo. It was there to supply a engineering and math capacity to a lot of the manufacturing industry in the area. But one of the game-changing moment, I think, was when the University of Waterloo adopted a pretty liberal intellectual property policy where they allowed students and professors to retain the rights to their own IP. And as a result, you had a ton of spin-off companies that came out of this. So it was really, I think, an unknown of what that would be at the time, but the effect of it was clearly RIM and dozens, if not hundreds, of spin-off companies that have come right out of the University of Waterloo. And now, as well as their co-op program, which was innovative at the time too. So that provided a really interesting labor force for startups to get going very quickly with really talented labor. So that was a big, I think that was actually the biggest change in our region. And it really wasn't about necessarily something that they planned or something that they wanted to manipulate. It was in fact the opposite. It was that they got out of the way. And so sometimes we have a tendency to overthink and overplan. And in fact, this was where we just let it happen and let organic talent creation happen unto itself.
Oh, great. And Chris, what in your world, what's a game changer?
Well, I think it's fascinating to step back and just look at the world that's changing right before our very eyes. There are roughly 2 billion people on the internet today, and there's going to be about 5 billion more to come in the next decade or so, depending on who you believe. And I just want us to stop and think about the profoundness of that for government, for industry, for business. It's massive. There will be more than 2x the number of people on the internet today in 10, 15 years. There are 5 billion mobile devices. There will be 10 billion devices. So these changes are game-changing for all of us. And I think as I listen to the themes from the conference over the last several days, it's really about how do we get ahead of that as a city? How do we get ahead of that as a region or as a country? And there's lots of different ways to do that, starting with taking stock of the unique assets and skills that are a part of this city and this region. And I heard the word diversity, and I think that is a fantastic asset if we have the right mindset. So really these 5 billion people, by the way, many of whom have cousins here in Canada, will be looking to pathfinders. They'll be looking to communities that have really done this well, cities and regions that have delivered on social innovation, cities and regions that really have figured out how to integrate these diverse communities. So I just wanted to start with that. And as it relates to Google itself, this is our business. Game changing is what we do for a living. And I'd say the single most important thing that our founders have given us and live in our DNA to this day is this notion to think massively big. Whatever you're thinking, think bigger. We call it 10x thinking or moonshot thinking. And a moonshot, in reference to JFK's a famous quote, of course, or speech rather, is live somewhere between an audacious technology and science fiction. It's not striving for 5 or 10% improvement or tinkering around the edges, but trying to deliver 10x improvement over what is currently out there today. And this, as I said, is in our DNA. It changes how we look at everything, right? It leads us to ask questions like, what if the internet was 100 times faster than it is today? That's being delivered with our Google Fiber program. It leads us to say, what if cars could drive themselves, right? And when you first hear these crazy ideas, people kind of shudder, but that to us is how change happens. If you look back at how any major thing happens in society, it starts with a crazy person with an audacious goal. And I think that's in short supply. So I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more of that as a citizen. I certainly, I try to model this as a leader at a wonderful company. But to me, it comes down to that mindset, that courage and curiosity to just dream these incredible dreams and then actually have the courage to set them as audacious goals.
Fantastic. Anyone on the panel want to respond to that? Maybe you do, because you must have had a crazy, audacious
Yeah, I
goal.
mean, the Sharp project was
Yeah.
a crazy idea, but we were very blessed in Manchester, which we have very stable political leadership. So we
What was
have
that you just said?
stable political and actually visionary. We have visionary leadership, and even though politicians, I know, find it hard to do, they are prepared to take a big risk for a big idea, and they also take a 50 to 100 year view, and a kind of 10 to 15 year view. And actually, that's one of the big lessons. That's why Manchester survived so long and have been a leader so long, because we take a very long-term view. That means if you have a long-term view and are ambitious and focused on that delivery with political stability, what you can actually do is see which way the world is changing. So we are constantly looking outward and over the parapet to see what other cities are doing. So we predicted the death of analog. We knew that there was going to be digital convergence. We wanted to mash that up as a sector that we needed to invest in. But we came across a big problem, which is that we didn't have the skills in the city to actually draw in the companies who will create the jobs now and the jobs that we know will be created in the future, though we don't know what those jobs are. And they're all based on data. I call it data wrangling. Who is going to mash up the data to turn it into stuff they can turn into content? And so we, with the city leaders and the private sector universities, are turning an oil tanker into teach this, change the skills, because our biggest problem and our opportunity and challenge is to skill up our population for the jobs of the future. And that is something I haven't really heard about at this conference today. So it's very much being invested in property and space. That is only something after you invest in people.
Anyone? Allison?
Yeah, I mean,
One of you clappers is going to be invited to speak next.
my response was clapping.
Okay, then you can speak
So-
next. That's perfect.
No, but I think there's an excellent point that both of you made there, which is that, there's a structural disconnect between political realities and long-term thinking, right? It's straightforward, and it's been well said before. Politics is about a very short ROI.
Yeah.
You're on an electoral cycle, and you are focused on the immediate, and that's just a reality. And that really, you can change term limits, and we in Ontario used to have 2-year municipal governments. Then we had 3, and now we have 4, which I think is actually tremendous because it delays the start of the silly season, the next election. Unlike Congress and other places where people start running for re-election the day they're elected. That being said, it's something that people need to push their politicians to do. And, I heard somebody say in the very first panel at this conference, what's our biggest mistake in Greater Toronto? We sat on our hands for 3 decades on transit. Well, there's a reason why that happened. Because many different levels of political leadership were unable to get the job done. In part, I think, because the immediacy of the political return was not there. That can change with different levels of citizen engagement. That can change. I'm fundamentally an optimist about this, and maybe I'm still young and naive. But I do believe one of the opportunities that we've got through technology, like what Google has been bringing us and others, is an opportunity to engage, call it the millennial generation, in a different way, and for them to demand more of their politicians.
I think they do, actually. So I think that's
Yeah.
an important part. Let's be clear, this is all about talent. Right? Nothing happens
Thank you.
without world-class talent. And
Yeah.
we want to talk about the quality of life in this city and the region that we want, right? The things, the green spaces, the walkable and the bikeable commuter routes, the thriving arts and culture, the sports and leisure, including a hockey team that plays into June. These are the things that if we're going to be serious about retaining and attracting the talent in the first place, we need to get absolutely serious about. And again, to your point, the younger generation wants this huge change. And I think this has always been said, I'm sure, but they demand this, right? They actually do want to be part of it. And actually, the way we define talent at Google is actually by the willingness and the ability of someone to tackle the biggest challenges.
Oh, really?
So it's really, really critical to us to have this long view in order to attract and retain the type of folks here, because if not, they're going to go elsewhere.
Awesome.
I have to comment on that because, so Jeff, you've got the hardest job in the world. I thought the Google guy had the hardest job. You actually have the hardest job in the whole world, because I do think that city politicians have to have the short view. They can't have the long view, unfortunately, because it is 4-year cycles. But when we're planning cities and we're thinking about talent acquisition, we're actually planning them for the 3-year-old that's living in Mumbai or Chongqing right now. We're not actually planning it around my 70-year-old parents living in a very white, middle-class neighborhood in London, Ontario. That's not actually who we're planning it for, but they're the ones who vote. So you're absolutely right. And a lot of the work that my firm has done with cities has been around this idea of meaningful engagement. And I want to pick up on that because we often, and if there are any city bureaucrats in the room, I apologize, but we often have checklists to go through around city engagement, public engagement. Oh, I've got to do public engagement. And really what you're doing is a disservice to some extent, because what you're doing is just consultation, and that is insulting to a lot of people. What people want, and especially what our millennials want, is they want real engagement. And engagement starts at the conceptual stage, goes all the way through ideation and prototyping and all the phases of an idea development, and frankly takes it all the way through to implementation. People and businesses and nonprofits and civil society want to be part of actually the delivering of services, not just, I'll give you my opinion and then I'm going to go back home. So where we really engage people from start to finish is where we're really going to have meaningful societies. And frankly, we're going to build cities around what's important to people and what matters to people. And we might even become innovative, and some of the work that we've done with cities has been around figuring out what in fact that 3-year-old in Mumbai wants, or what they're going to want in 30 years. And that's crazy if we can get to that point, but essentially that's who we're building it for. That's our end user.
And that's what our voters should demand. I am not evaluated on the quality. My performance is not evaluated on the quality of my long-term decision making,
No.
or the impact of my decisions on the long term. And it should be. It really should be.
Is this where we get, I'm interested in the macro, which obviously Google represents the big ideas, the space age thinking or spaceship thinking, and the micro, which is community-based. Macro, long-term, 50, 100 years, micro, 2 years, 3 years. Is this where, because we had a great session on, I thought it was a great session on big data. I've actually been wondering what big data was, and then this morning I came to a session, I found out what it was. Is this where data and this whole concept of the two-way grid in everything in life, whether it's the internet or plugging your car into the grid and getting energy exchanges, is that where that comes in? And maybe each of you could talk about, from your different perspectives, how that might work.
Data is the key to changing the world and running the world in the future.
Are you sure?
Absolutely.
What about people who couldn't do math?
Because data is
Doesn't
not about
matter.
numbers.
Oh, okay.
Data just means you have access to more information, which helps you make more informed decisions. That's all it means. It's not, you don't have to understand algorithms, you don't have to be a physicist, you actually have to know. And the guy from Sweden was interesting. Here's a little piece of box in my living room, which tells me I'm burning dollars by having the washing machine on tonight. So you don't need to know that's data or physics or algorithms. You just need to know I can save money by actually turning my washing machine off. So data is not how you gather it, it's how you, the individual consumer, consume it and can apply it to your own life.
When you say that, though, reminds me of my first trip to England when I was a kid, and you put coins in the meters.
Yeah.
So you didn't have much data, but you sure knew when there was no more hot water.
Well, actually,
Yes.
that's really important because actually you change people's behavior, but actually
Right.
saying it will cost them less.
Okay.
So it's not a kind of carrot, it's a big stick.
Okay, so data, how do we use it creatively? Where does the money come from? Just quickly on that point, and then we're going to
Well, I mean, this is a dangerous one to ask the guy from Google.
No, we want to
about that.
know.
Like, are you guys here? It's a long weekend, thank God. We could be here a while. Listen, I really agree with that. And I think government has a very important and big role to play as it relates to commitment to open data. If you look at going back in time, so GPS used to be something that was controlled by the government, right? Like it was a strategic military asset that no one should use. And of course, probably one of you has that technology in your pocket today. Same with weather-related information. Now, companies like the Weather Channel and others would not exist without this. So we're in a revolution around healthcare and information around our health. These things are absolute tsunamis of data that unleash things that we don't even know. Our imagination doesn't even know right now. And I'll give you, big data doesn't need to be scary. I mean, there's a great example in the city of Edmonton. In the last 5 years, they've used big data, or little data in this case, to reduce the number of traffic fatalities or injuries by 40% at a time when their city has grown 11%. And how did they do that? Well, they looked at the traffic data, or the collision reports that were made available, and they, some enterprising transit officials studied and said, listen, 30% of these accidents happen at a certain type of intersection, one with a dedicated right turn lane. So what did they do? They modified a lot of the intersections. And lo and behold, they see some dramatic improvements in life. So again, I think we're on the precipice of lots and lots of stuff, right? And again, I often say like technology is so far ahead of our creativity. Data and the ability to make good, important decisions that impact the quality of our lives is right there for us. So the role for government is to commit to open data. The role for private sector is to take that information and be responsible stewards of it and come up with interesting entrepreneurial ideas that make people's lives better.
But also make jobs and actually
Right.
create wealth
Okay.
and drive economies.
So then I'm going to ask people to talk about how do we make sure, because this is supposed to be about cities, we have to come back to cities, and we're also supposed to talk about creativity. How do we make sure that creative people, artists, designers, that whole range of people get a chance to contribute creativity to make sure that we can use the data, that we can build the infrastructure and create the jobs? How do we do that?
Ask them.
Ask them.
Yeah.
Ask them and
How about
involve
pay
them.
them?
Completely
It's
agree.
actually not, and I want to pick up on this example because, and this is where government has to realize that they have a huge resource available to them that's just out there to do a lot of the jobs and work that they just don't either know how to do or can't do. There's a great, I think it's close to Manchester, there's a great app that's out there right now that's used by a city in the UK called fixmystreet.com. And if you go outside and you see a pothole in spring, and we got a few of them here in Canada, then you say, at the corner of so-and-so I got a pothole. And then even better, some other organized places in the US have taken this and they have a volunteer committee that goes out and fills the pothole because they can see it online.
You know what's even better than that? I'm going to interrupt for a sec because you don't even need to log it. The accelerometer in the actual device knows when you hit a bloody pothole.
Right, okay, so then with Google, you got it even better, which is awesome. You don't even have to do, but I will say this, in Kitchener and Waterloo, they for years they were trying to figure out how do we create an app for transit users to know when the next bus is going to come and they were fighting on how do we do this, and somebody figured out at Google that you can do this already, and now they don't have to create that app because Google has that app already.
Yeah, we're
so,
bringing it to...
Yeah, exactly.
We're rolling it out in August. And you know what? Let's just take that other last idea about potholes one step further. What if, when the bus hit the pothole, the bus talked to the works truck directly and downloaded the location, because the bus knows where it is, tells the truck directly, there's a pothole, go there and fill it. I mean, and then you're taking out the user step in the middle of it. You're actually automatically detecting and generating work orders to fill potholes. We installed little automatic meter readers on everybody's water meter about 2 years ago. Lots of cities have this, but they're a little hockey puck that goes onto your water meter, and the meter reads itself, so no more people walking around reading your water meter. There was a clear business case for that because people didn't have to walk around and read water meters anymore. But the unintended or intended consequence was it benefited conservation because we could take the technology, the meter reads itself every 15 minutes. We put that data on the internet. You could log in and see your water consumption pattern, and it encourages conservation because you suddenly go, oh, wait a minute, at 4 o'clock every day, my water bill's going through the roof because something's happening, and it's you start watering your lawn or something. You just change your consumption pattern. One step further for us as a local authority, the capacity to generate all that water is peaky. But if we can spread those peaks out, because we understand the consumption pattern better and we can use storage differently, we can save ourselves hundreds of millions in capital costs. So if that data actually had been available to us about 10 years ago, we may actually have made different capital decisions than what we made. That's how it's going to shape things in the future. The potential to do things more efficiently is amazing.
I want to give people in the audience a chance to do one of two things. One, share with us, so we can respond, your aha moments during this conference, something that really struck you that somebody said or something that you really learned. And then the other is ask our panelists a question, any question. Okay, you, please.
Hi there, thank you very much for this. My name is Laura Taylor, and I'm a professor at York University and the head of the planning program there. And I have a comment and I have a question. And the comment is about politicians. And I have to say that the comment was that politicians aren't rewarded for doing things that are over the long term. And David Crombie is here 40 years later, and he is being rewarded for being a great mayor. And I really think that we need to take a long-term view. You know, once you're a mayor, you're always a mayor. Once you're a premier, you're always a premier. I mean, people still think of you as that decision maker and judge you on that. So I just want to support your long-term view as you go forward. And so my question is, not nearly so happy, is that what about the curmudgeons? So what do you do with the people who don't want, as Calvin said in the previous session, what about the people who don't want the messiness? What about people who aren't open to this? What about the people who don't want to know what everybody else thinks and don't want to know what the millennials think? So how do you, in your daily life, what do you do? Thank you.
Okay. Do you mind if I take that one? Only because, so this is what I do for a living. We deal with curmudgeons. No, just kidding. But what we do is we do a lot of engagement. And what's interesting about this is that when we've talked to people who really hold on to something, and for example, there's some questions about densification that were talked about earlier, and if you're living in an older neighborhood that's about to have a high rise in your backyard, that's hard, that's tricky, and you're going to resist that. And what you do there is you figure out, in fact, what is the real problem behind that? What's the human emotion that's behind this? What are they seeking? And then it's that you use that piece of knowledge to innovate around it. So what you can't do, and I know Jeff knows this, you can't say, so sorry, too bad, so sad, you're just going to have a high rise in your backyard. That just doesn't work. But you can get to the real fear behind that. What are they fearful of, and what is it the issue that they're concerned about? And how can you allay those fears when you're talking about the planning and the development that you're going to need to do, because you've made that decision as a community, so that they can feel part of it. And then I would add to this, involve them in the process. Have them part of the ideation. Don't just have them be responding to things, but have them coming up with solutions. So if you say to them, well, we've got 200,000 people coming our community in the next 10 years, they're going to have to live somewhere. What do you think where do you think they should live? How are we going to involve them? How are we going to have a thriving community with these people in our backyards? How are we going to deal with that and involve them in the process?
Super great answer. Let's take another question and we'll send it to somebody else.
One up here.
Great.
My aha moment was the comment about Rahm Emanuel saying that we're building a 21st century on 18th century infrastructure. But it seemed to me that a kind of corollary of that is that we're building a 21st century cities on 18th century political infrastructure. And that what's interesting is if you listen to Bill Maher, he rails against the fact that in the United States, Rhode Island has as many senators as California and New York. Each state has 2 senators. And you know, the interesting thing about, and this is a kind of question, is the interesting thing about the big data discussion is how much of this stuff is happening despite the political infrastructure. And the question is how much of that big data is actually being used to inform these political decisions. I'm not sure if it's different in Barrie or in Burlington, but you know, you've got these sort of discussions at the local level about building a Humbertown development. And the question is, there's all of this potential data about the impact of those things, and it still goes down to kind of these kind of very local, I don't want that in my backyard, despite the fact that you might be able to show that it might actually be better. So it's just a question about, you know, it seems like if you're optimistic, there's all of this stuff happening. If you're kind of pessimistic, you say, there's all of this stuff, why isn't it factoring into the kind of political decision making?
Can I pick that one up? Toronto is in a different place than a city like Manchester. England's in a different place from North America. We were really badly affected by the Lehman crash, and we caught that kind of wave of economic depression. So we've been in a double dip recession for 4 years. That kind of could have stopped us in our tracks. Well, actually, what it has done is make us think differently. One of the things it's made us think is you can't actually depend on national or kind of, in your case, provincial government, because actually you're on your own. You just have to go and do things that are the right thing for Junior City. So our big problem currently, and this is where politicians' minds and the commissions actually get focused, is we have every nationality and every language on the planet spoken in Manchester. We are probably the most diverse city in Europe outside of London. That's both good because newcomers bring talent and creative and cultural things, and that's fantastic. It also brings a lot of problems. So we haven't got enough school places. It's a terrible pressure on our health and resource section. We haven't got enough suitable housing. And so all that puts an economic strain on cities. So for a politician, locally, even domestically, or a curmudgeon, you have to turn it back into an economic argument and go, if you've got 200,000 newcomers, where are they going to live? Where are they going to be schooled? How are you going to provide them with healthcare? How will they get to work? And actually, that's going to be a cost to you, this community. But the benefits will be utilising their talent to actually turn it into a resource. But you have to have that conversation with yourselves now and not wait for a government to tell you what to do. You have to kind of, it might be a vision coming down, but it has to be growth from up. You are the voice of the city, and you have to make it heard. Because it's going to happen to your community.
It's absolutely so important because I think, I don't have a good answer to that, but I can tell you that I think one of the most insidious problems we have right now is this kind of war on reason. We have all of these facts, more data available to us to make good decisions, and yet a political culture in some areas that is pushing us away from using it and somehow suggesting that using that information is in some way a bad thing. I mean, it is one of the most dangerous things that is going on in our political culture in North America right now. And if nothing else, and again, I maintain my optimism that some of the tools that are out there and the new methods of consultation that are out there can push us back to making decisions based on actual facts and information rather than opinion and ideology.
We have time for maybe 2 more questions. Yes.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Marcelo, and I do want to say I think Chris's game-changing moment was actually wearing the number 5 for a certain hockey team when he was 17, so he could hit players like no other. Thank you. Thanks for everyone's contribution. I think that we're at a really interesting place in our city, in the last 5 years specifically, and I think it's really about the idea that we're all believing within the state of being, I am worthy. And so I think we're actually sitting here right now, and we're actually having these conversations because we believe that we are worthy. So that's actually a good thing. So I think we should all kind of applaud ourselves to say we are worthy, and that's why we're here. Go ahead. The second thing is that I think, and this idea of actually meaningful engagement, I think is the most, the biggest takeaway that I've taken over the last few days, and is the idea that I think that we should all aspire to be the stupidest person in the room and surround ourselves with the best, and actually get it done. It doesn't matter who is making the decisions, it's just getting it actually done. So meaningful engagement, actually engaging the millennials, maybe in actually creating an actual real Toronto Innovation Fund, which actually has millions of dollars attached to it, and actually having the market bear the best idea could be something to take away. Thank you.
Make one little conclusion.
One little conclusion, then we need to wrap out.
We didn't talk that much about art and artists, but a big event that happened, there's reasons for that happened in Toronto was a group of artists got together 10 years ago and came up with an incredible idea, tax billboards. And I don't know how many people are aware, pretty much the first time in the world that's ever happened. They persuaded city government to back that. Naturally, the billboard people weren't too happy about having to pay a tax, so they dragged this through the courts for 10 years. In the meantime, the tax built up, $10 million, right? And I will say this, the mayor our current mayor has been extremely good to the arts. He's been consistently good to the arts. This has to go on record, which is why I want to say something. So that yesterday, the big announcement was made, and effectively, there is going to be a fund for creative innovation as a result of the action of artists. Imagine, artists figured out a way to get $10 million into the city. So I'd like to acknowledge that, because I know we have so many business people and people who think that the art is like like the cherry on the sundae, but I mean, it's pretty substantial.
Great. Well, thank you very
Thank you.
much. Please join me in thanking our panel. I think we could go on and on. It's been a wonderful and rich discussion. Thank you very much.